Dutch volunteers in the Waffen-SS during World War II. We've talked a great deal about that on this channel. Around 25,000 Dutch men served in the Waffen-SS. Most of them fought on the Eastern Front. Between 4,000 and 6,000 of them were either killed or missing in action, around 21%. What happened to the survivors? In this video, you're going to learn about the fate of the Dutch Waffen-SS volunteers after the war. Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, my name is Stefan. I run this channel, History Hustle. I make videos about history for you. If you find it interesting, consider subscribing. If you want to support me, please do so. You can do that via PayPal or via Patreon. In the Netherlands, the Germans surrendered on the 5th of May, although the official signing took place one day later. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Another signing took place on the 9th of May. Once the war ended, Nazis and collaborators were prosecuted and in some cases lynched by angry mobs. In the days after liberation, aggression by the Dutch was not directed towards German soldiers, but towards collaborating fellow countrymen, or alleged collaborators. We're talking about members of the Dutch Nazi Party, the NSB, but also girls that had flirted, dated, or slept with German soldiers were targeted. Although these women were not violently attacked, they were often publicly humiliated, shaved bald, and swastikas were painted on their heads. Dutch volunteers for the Waffen-SS served in the Viking Division in Regiment Westland and the Dutch Volunteer Legion. Later in the war, these units were renamed. Then there was also Landsturm Nederland for those who did not want to serve abroad and thus stayed in the Netherlands, although some of them saw action in Belgium. Many of these were in the country when the war ended. They were uncertain what to do, trying to escape or stick together. One of them wrote, "Indeed, on the day of the capitulation, the boys were told that anyone who thought they could reach their home could go. Several did so after providing oneself partially or fully with civilian clothes. But very few seem to have managed to get home. The Dutch underground forces appeared in public that day and arrested practically everyone they did not know. When we received confirmation that we could go, I also had my doubts, but I soon realized that this was an impossibility. After all, I could only have gone to Epe, where everyone knows me. And what should I have done there? Come crawling back home? Never. Besides, there was no chance of that anyway, because long before that time I would have been caught, and so I decided to stay." Many of those who were trying to escape were caught by the Binnenlandse Strijdkrachten, the domestic forces. It was a group of armed resistance men that wanted to disarm the Germans. This was explicitly forbidden by the Allies because of the lack of discipline of the Binnenlandse Strijdkrachten. The Allies feared it would lead to incidents, and these incidents did happen. It resulted in several deaths. Collaborators caught were often publicly humiliated. One volunteer, he remained with his unit and was POW'd by the Canadians. He wrote, "We had Canadian troops on guard again. We sang loudly. Hundreds of cursing civilians lined the road. And sometimes one would attack one of us to rip off its war decorations. But then a few Canadians would immediately jump off the accompanying jeeps and hit them." 11th to 25th May, housed in a tent camp where we were well looked after. The Allies looked after them because they were treated as POWs and also to prevent lynchings. Dutch politicians feared that a day of reckoning would come and countless of people, collaborators and alleged collaborators would lose their lives. It never got that bad. Yes, some revenge killings did take place, but this was not widespread. What did occur were widespread arrests. And those who performed the arrests were inspired by a quote Queen Wilhelmina stated via the radio, where she said that in the liberated Netherlands there would be no more room for traitors. And although these words weren't repeated in later broadcasts, they remained in the minds of the Dutch civilians. So let's take a look at the Dutch Waffen-SS volunteers that were in Germany when the war came to an end. Most of them ended up in the hands of the Western Allies, and after serving time in an American or British POW camp, they were extradited to the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, they were put together in camps with other people accused of collaboration. According to historian Peter Romein, between 120 and 150,000 Dutch people accused of collaboration were detained in the Netherlands after the war. These people were interned in one of the 130 camps. In these camps, whole families were sometimes interned. For this, former German camps like Camp Westerbork, Vught and Amersfoort were used, as well as army barracks, schools, fortresses, factories and warehouses. The prisoners were guarded by the domestic forces, who, like I said before, lacked discipline. This combined with their hatred for the enemy resulted in severe abuses, assaults and even murder. In 63 of the 130 camps, there were incidents of severe abuses. In 60 camps, there were no reports of abuses, and in 7 camps, there were reports that the treatment of inmates was humane. One notorious exception was Camp de Harskamp, where around 4,000 of the 18,500 Dutch Waffen-SS volunteers who survived the war ended up. The camp was initially guarded by the Canadians, but they handed over command to the Dutch forces. In June 1945, one of the inmates wrote about a change of guard. June 27th, we were handed over to the BS by the Canadians. From that moment on, we were no longer prisoners of war, but political prisoners. In the months after the Dutch took over the command of the camp, wild shootings occurred, which resulted in injuring and sometimes killing some of the inmates. Punitive exercise was now a daily occurrence. Guards often withheld food to the prisoners, which resulted in malnutrition. And beatings took place during interrogation. 11 inmates were killed and a likewise number was severely injured. Another 8 were killed because they had to clear landmines. Mid-1946, many of the inmates were tried and therefore transferred, and by the end of that year, the Harskamp stopped functioning as a prison camp for collaborators. The excesses in the internment camps are perhaps understandable, or at least a logical consequence of the emotions that played a role. One could not suppress the hatred and feelings of revenge against the Dutch traitors. After 5 years of Nazi oppression, those who were partly responsible for this had to be punished. Later, a parliamentary committee of inquiry investigated the matter. During the war, the Dutch government in exile devised a special legal system to punish collaborators after the war, with its main goal to avoid kangaroo courts. Now, there are a lot of different numbers and number of arrests and number of charges in the book Veldgrauw, written by Evertjan van Roekel. A total of 64,482 judgments have been passed. Around 6,800 were Waffen-SS volunteers. Compared to the other West European countries, the Netherlands punished many of its subjects. Van Roekel stated that at the end, the special legal system can be called unsuccessful, since many collaborators were not punished. Most Waffen-SS volunteers were sentenced between 5 to 10 years in prison for serving in foreign military service against the Netherlands and its allies. With ease circumstances, this could be brought down to 3 years. With aggravating circumstances, like having served in the Dutch army before, sentences could go up to 15 years. Life imprisonment and the death penalty were rare. The countless cases had to be preceded in a very short amount of time. So therefore, it looked more like assembly line work. From 1948, large-scale pardons were given. According to historian Van Roekel, instead of fast, strict and fair, the post-war prosecutions can be described as rushed, too strict and quite random. And as time progressed, the hatred against the collaborators subsided, and eventually they were also readopted in Dutch society. Nevertheless, many of them held grudges of how they were treated. Some of them were war criminals, but some of them believed they fought for a right cause. Decorated volunteer Gerard Mooijman was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He was released in 1949 and established himself as an entrepreneur in Groningen. Mooijman avoided publicity and lived a nondescript life. That changed for a while in 1967 when he had himself interviewed in the magazine Revue. Mooijman distanced himself from his past in strong terms. I regard everything I experienced in the German period as a great personal tragedy. As a youthful National Socialist and fanatic fighter for this ideal, I later came to the conclusion that I fought and suffered for a criminal cause. In 1987, Mooijman died in a traffic accident. Not all former Dutch Waffen-SS volunteers returned to the Netherlands. An uncertain number had been POW'd by the Soviets and were sent to Siberia. I read that in the mid-1950s, around 200 of them returned to the Netherlands. That is all I know. If you have any more information on the Dutch in the Gulag, please let me know. A number of 6,000 remained in Germany because they feared for what awaited them back home. Some later escaped the Dutch prison and made it to Germany, such as Herbertus Bicker, nicknamed the Butcher of Ommen, Alka Patist, who later went to Spain, and Toon Soeterbier. Some of those who served prison sentences later served in Indonesia or Korea, but that is a story for another time. Thanks to my patrons, you see their names on the screen. A special thanks to Philip Jordan, Jacob Moslund, Nick Terranova, Haley Berry, Mark Little-Hale, Janusz Dozenkiewicz, Joanne, Justin Trebell, Tanya Dixie, Henry Clarkson, Rob Park, Andrea Martic, Susanne Di Bella, Fernando Lopez Ojeda, and Mike West. If you'd like to learn more about Dutch volunteers in the Waffen-SS, please click right here for the full playlist. Consider becoming a patron, because with your support I can make more videos about this interesting, fascinating topic. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you later.